The crack of a whip echoed through the dusty streets of Knight's Ferry, California, drawing Olivia Turner's tear-filled eyes upward to where her father stood on the auction block beside her, his face a mask of shame as he prepared to sell his only daughter to the highest bidder on this sweltering August day in 1872. 20 years old, healthy as a horse, and knows her way around a kitchen, the auctioneer bellowed, his greedy eyes scanning the crowd of men who had gathered in the town square. Who'll start the bidding for this fine specimen of womanhood? Her labor's yours for 5 years, more than enough to cover the Turner family debts. Olivia trembled as rough hands yanked her forward, forcing her to stand before the leering crowd. Her cotton dress, once her Sunday best, now hung limp and soiled from the 3 days she'd spent locked in the town jail awaiting this moment. Her father wouldn't meet her gaze, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of his failure. The drought had claimed their crops for the 3rd year running, and the bank had finally called in their loans. When her mother died last winter, the doctor's bills had been the final blow. $100. Called a voice from the crowd. Jasper Quinn, the saloon owner whose wandering hands and lecherous stares had haunted Olivia since she turned 16. 200, countered Albert Wilkes, the aging banker whose wife had died a year ago. Olivia's stomach turned. The contract of indenture her father had signed would bind her to whichever man paid the highest price. 5 years of servitude, though everyone in town knew what kind of service these men expected. $500. The new voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and steady. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure astride a midnight black stallion. The sun silhouetted him, casting his face in shadow, but Olivia could make out broad shoulders, a worn leather vest, and a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Well now, looks like we've got ourselves a serious bidder," the auctioneer grinned, slapping his thigh. 500 from the stranger. "Do I hear 6? Jasper Quinn scowled. 600. $1,000, the stranger countered immediately, his voice betraying no emotion. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $1,000 was more than most men in Knight's Ferry saw in a year. 1,000 going once, going twice. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that sealed Olivia's fate. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion and strode forward. As he stepped into the light, Olivia got her first clear look at him, tall and weathered, perhaps 30 years old, with eyes the color of a summer storm. A jagged scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the stubble that shadowed his face. "Name's Bryce Nathans," he said, extending a leather pouch of coins to the auctioneer. "I'll be taking the contract now." The auctioneer counted the money with eager fingers before handing over the document. Olivia's father stepped forward then, his eyes downcast. "Mr. Nathans, he began, but Bryce cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it, Turner. You've said all you need to say by putting your name on this paper." He tucked the contract into his vest and turned to Olivia. "Get your things. We're leaving." "I don't have anything," Olivia whispered, her voice catching on unshed tears. Something flickered in Bryce's eyes, anger perhaps, or pity. He nodded once, then gestured toward his horse. "Then we go now." Before she could protest, he gripped her waist and lifted her effortlessly onto his stallion, then swung up behind her. The crowd of townsfolk parted, some looking disappointed, others merely curious about the stranger who had just spent a small fortune on a farmer's daughter. "Papa." Olivia called out, her voice breaking as Bryce turned the horse toward the edge of town. Her father didn't answer, already shuffling toward the saloon to drown his shame. Bryce clicked his tongue, and the horse broke into a steady trot. Olivia sat rigid in the saddle, too afraid to lean back against the hard chest of the man who now owned her labor, and perhaps more for the next 5 years. They rode in silence until Knight's Ferry disappeared behind them. The California sun beat down mercilessly as they followed a trail leading into the foothills. After nearly an hour, Bryce finally spoke. "Are you hurt?" The question surprised her. "No," she answered softly, "not physically." He nodded against her hair. "Good." Another mile passed before he guided the horse off the main trail toward a small clearing beside a stream. Without explanation, he dismounted and lifted her down, then led his horse to the water's edge. Olivia stood frozen, uncertain what was expected of her. Would he demand his rights as her new master right here in the wilderness? Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, trembling but determined to fight if necessary. Bryce returned from tending his horse and must have read her thoughts in her stance. He kept his distance, raising his hands slightly. "I'm not going to hurt you, Miss Turner." "Then why did you buy me?" she demanded, finding her voice at last. "What do you want?" Without answering, Bryce reached into his vest and pulled out the contract. He held it up so she could see her father's signature at the bottom, the scrawl that had sold her future to pay for his past. "You know what this says?" he asked. "That I belonged to you for 5 years, she whispered, bile rising in her throat. "No," he said firmly. "It says your labor belongs to me, not your body, not your soul, just your work." Before she could respond, he struck a match against his boot and held the flame to the corner of the document. Fire licked at the paper, consuming the words that had bound her fate to his. "What are you doing?" Olivia gasped, watching as the contract curled and blackened. Bryce dropped the burning paper to the ground and crushed the ashes beneath his heel. "Giving you your freedom." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "I don't understand." "You don't need to." He turned back toward his horse. "There's a stage that passes through Sonora, about 10 miles south. I can take you there, give you enough money to get wherever you want to go." "Why would you spend $1,000 just to set me free?" Suspicion colored her voice. He paused, one hand on his saddle. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Because 5 years ago no one did the same for my sister." The words hung in the air between them. Olivia felt something shift in her understanding of this stern-faced stranger. "What happened to her?" "She died." His voice was flat, emotionless. 6 months into her contract with a man who worked her day and night and beat her when she couldn't stand anymore. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered. Bryce finally turned to face her. "Don't be sorry, just take your freedom and make something of it." She took a step toward him. "I have nowhere to go. My father sold our farm to the bank. I have no family, no friends outside of Knight's Ferry. That's not my concern." His words were harsh, but his eyes betrayed him. There was compassion there, hidden beneath layers of what looked like years of pain. "Then why not just leave me in town? Why bring me out here at all?" Bryce sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. "Because Quinn or Wilkes would have found a way to claim you anyway. Knight's Ferry isn't safe for you now." Olivia knew he was right. The town had been watching her since she blossomed into womanhood, and now that she had been publicly auctioned, her reputation was irredeemably tarnished. Even with her freedom, there was no place for her there. "So what now?" she asked, lifting her chin with the first spark of defiance she'd felt since her father had told her of his desperate plan. Bryce considered her for a long moment. "I've got a ranch about a day's ride from here. There's a cabin on the property where the foreman used to live before he moved on. You can stay there until you figure out your next move." He held up a hand when she started to speak. "In exchange for honest work, cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. Nothing more." Olivia studied him, searching for deceit in his weather-lined face and finding none. "Why would you help me?" "You don't even know me." "Maybe I'm trying to balance the scales," he said quietly. "Or maybe I just need a cook. Either way, the offer stands. You can come with me or I can take you to Sonora. Your choice." Olivia looked around at the wilderness surrounding them. Freedom was a terrifying thing when you had nowhere to go with it. "I'll come to your ranch," she decided finally, "but I won't be beholden to you. I'll work, and when I've earned enough to move on, I will." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." He extended his hand formally. "We have a deal, Miss Turner." She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm. "We have a deal, Mr. Nathans." They rode through the afternoon, stopping only once to rest the horse and drink from a clear stream. As the sun began its descent, they crested a hill and Bryce pulled the horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. Olivia's breath caught. A sprawling ranch spread out beneath them, a large main house built of solid timber, a barn, several corrals where horses grazed, and beyond them, rolling pastures dotted with cattle. A smaller cabin stood a little way from the main house, smoke curling from its chimney. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Bryce replied simply, urging the horse forward. As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn, waving enthusiastically. "That's Daniel," Bryce explained. "He helps with the stock. There's also Mrs. Abernathy, who keeps house, and 3 other hands who work the cattle. They've got a bunkhouse on the far side of the property." Relief flooded through Olivia at the knowledge that they wouldn't be alone. Whatever Bryce Nathans's intentions, there were witnesses, other people who would notice if she disappeared or was mistreated. Daniel jogged up to take the reins as they reached the yard. "Welcome back, boss. Wasn't expecting you for another day at least." His curious gaze lingered on Olivia before darting back to Bryce. "Everything go all right in town?" "Well enough," Bryce said, dismounting before reaching up to help Olivia down. "Daniel, this is Miss Olivia Turner. She'll be staying in the foreman's cabin and helping around the place." Daniel touched his hat brim. "Madam, pleasure to meet you." "Thank you," Olivia managed, unused to such courteous treatment after the degradation of the auction block. "Get Biscuit rubbed down and fed, would you?" Bryce asked, and Daniel led the horse away. Turning to Olivia, he added, "Let's get you settled." The cabin was small but clean, with a main room containing a wood stove, table, and 2 chairs, and a separate bedroom with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt. Simple curtains hung at the windows, and a braided rug softened the plank floor. "Mrs. Abernathy keeps it ready for visitors," Bryce explained. "There's wood stacked outside, and the pump in the yard has good water. Outhouse is around back." Olivia stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her fate had taken. This morning she had awakened in a jail cell, awaiting sale. Now she stood in a cozy cabin, technically free though still dependent on the man before her. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is more than I expected." "What did you expect?" Bryce asked, his voice guarded. She met his gaze squarely. "To be used until I was broken. That's what happens to women who are sold." His jaw tightened, and she saw again that flash of old pain in his eyes. "Not here," he said firmly. "Not ever." An older woman appeared at the door then, her arms laden with linens and a basket of supplies. "Mr. Nathans, Daniel said we had a guest." She bustled in, depositing her burden on the table. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy, dear. I've brought some fresh sheets, soap, and a few things for your supper tonight." "This is Miss Turner," Bryce said. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Abernathy's kind eyes took in Olivia's disheveled appearance and travel-worn dress without judgment. "Well, you must be exhausted, Miss Turner. Why don't I help you get settled?" "Mr. Nathans, I'm sure you've got business to attend to." Bryce seemed relieved at the dismissal. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Abernathy's capable hands. Supper's at the main house at 6 if you're feeling up to it." After he left, Mrs. Abernathy turned to Olivia with a sympathetic smile. "Now then, let's get you a bath drawn and find you something fresh to wear. I think I've got a dress that might fit you with just a bit of taking in." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. "Don't you worry about a thing, dear. Whatever brought you here, you're safe now. Mr. Nathans is a good man, though he tries his best to hide it." As the older woman bustled about preparing a bath in a large metal tub, Olivia wondered about the man who had bought her freedom at such cost. What drove someone to spend $1,000 on a stranger? The story about his sister explained part of it, but there was more to Bryce Nathans than he was showing. Of that she was certain. An hour later, clean and dressed in a simple blue cotton dress that Mrs. Abernathy had altered with swift, sure stitches, Olivia felt almost human again. Her damp hair hung in loose waves down her back, and though her face in the small mirror still showed the strain of recent days, at least she looked presentable. "There now," Mrs. Abernathy said with satisfaction. "You'll do just fine. Shall we head up to the main house for supper? The men will be coming in from the field soon, and they do work up fearsome appetites." Olivia hesitated. Perhaps I should stay here tonight. It's been a long day." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Of course, dear. I'll bring you a tray. But tomorrow you must join us. It won't do to hide away." After the housekeeper left, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to process the day's events. Tears came then, quiet at first, then building into wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her lost home, for her father's betrayal, for the mother who had died too soon to protect her, and for the uncertainty of her future. When the tears finally subsided, she felt hollow but somehow lighter, as if the weight of fear had been partially lifted from her shoulders. A soft knock at the door roused her. Expecting Mrs. Abernathy with the promised supper tray, she was startled to find Bryce standing there instead, a covered plate in his hands. Mrs. Abernathy was busy with the men's supper, he explained, sounding almost apologetic. "May I come in?" Olivia nodded, quickly wiping away the last traces of tears. Bryce set the plate on the table and removed the cover, revealing a generous portion of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, hovering awkwardly near the door as if reluctant to venture further into her space. "Thank you." She sat at the table, suddenly aware of how famished she was. Her father had only been able to smuggle her meager portions during her days in the jail. Bryce watched her take a few bites before speaking again. "I want to make sure you understand your position here, Miss Turner." She looked up sharply. "My position? You're not a servant or an indentured worker. You're a free woman who's agreed to exchange labor for lodging temporarily." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "What I mean to say is, you can leave any time you choose, and while you're here, you'll be treated with respect." "Why is that so important to you?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze steadily. "Because respect is something that should be given freely to all people, not earned or purchased." The conviction in his voice stirred something within her. "Not everyone shares that belief, Mr. Nathans. Certainly not the men in Knight's Ferry. I'm not those men." His voice hardened. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd remember that." Olivia set down her fork. "I don't know you, Mr. Nathans. You purchased me this morning, burned my contract, and brought me to your home. Forgive me if I'm still trying to understand your motivations." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Fair enough. I'll leave you to your supper." He turned to go but paused at the door. "Mrs. Abernathy will come by in the morning to show you around. Rest well, Miss Turner." After he left, Olivia finished her meal in solitude, pondering the enigma of Bryce Nathans. A man who spent a fortune to free a stranger, yet bristled at the slightest suggestion that his motives might be questioned. A man who clearly carried deep wounds from his past, yet had created this peaceful haven in the California foothills. As she slipped between the fresh sheets that night, Olivia realized that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid of what the morning might bring. Whatever else Bryce Nathans might be, her instincts told her he was indeed a man of his word. For tonight, that was enough. The following days established a routine that gave Olivia a sense of stability she hadn't felt since before her mother's illness. Each morning, she helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The older woman was a font of information about the running of the ranch and its owner. "Mr. Nathans came here 5 years ago," she explained on Olivia's third morning as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "Bought the place when it was little more than a run-down shack and a few scrawny cattle. Built it up into one of the finest spreads in the county through sheer determination." "Where did he come from?" Olivia asked, trying to sound merely conversational. Mrs. Abernathy's hand stilled briefly. "Back east somewhere. Ohio, I think. He doesn't talk much about before. Lost his family young from what little he said." "He mentioned a sister," Olivia ventured. "Catherine was her name," Mrs. Abernathy nodded sadly. "He searched for her for nearly 2 years before he found out what happened. That's what brought him west, I reckon. Needed a fresh start after that." Olivia absorbed this information, adding it to the puzzle that was Bryce Nathans. She saw little of him those first days. He left at dawn with the other men and returned after dark, taking his meals quickly before retreating to what Mrs. Abernathy called his study, a room at the back of the main house, where he kept the ranch accounts and his personal library. On her 5th day at the ranch, Olivia was hanging laundry in the yard when Bryce rode up on Biscuit, dismounting with the easy grace she'd come to associate with him. He nodded a greeting, then hesitated as if unsure whether to approach her or continue to the house. "Good morning, Mr. Nathans," she called, making the decision for him. He walked over, removing his hat. "Miss Turner, how are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Abernathy has been most helpful." "Good." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wondered if you might like to see more of the ranch. It's a fine day for a ride." Olivia's surprise must have shown on her face because he quickly added, "Only if you'd like to, of course." The idea of leaving the immediate vicinity of the house both excited and frightened her. She hadn't been on a horse since the day he brought her here. "I would like that," she found herself saying. "Though I must warn you, I'm not an accomplished rider." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I've got a gentle mare that would suit you." An hour later, they rode side by side along a trail that wound through oak-studded hills. Olivia sat astride a dun-colored mare named Daisy, who indeed seemed content to amble along at an easy pace. The September sun warmed her face, and the scent of wild sage filled the air. "It's beautiful here," she commented as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a meadow where a herd of cattle grazed. "So peaceful." Bryce nodded, his eyes scanning the land with evident pride. "I knew this was the place the moment I saw it. Something about the light on these hills." It was the most personal statement she'd heard from him. Encouraged, she asked, "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "No. My father was a lawyer back in Cincinnati, expected me to follow in his footsteps. I was studying law when—" He trailed off, his expression closing. "When your sister was taken," Olivia finished softly. His sharp glance confirmed her guess. "Mrs. Abernathy talks too much." "She cares about you," Olivia countered. "Everyone here does. They respect you." "Respect is earned," he said, echoing their earlier conversation but with a different inflection. "You said it should be freely given." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing beyond the surface for the first time. "You have a good memory, Miss Turner." "Olivia," she corrected. "If we're to be friends, you should use my given name." "Friends?" He seemed genuinely startled by the concept. "Isn't that possible? Or am I merely an obligation to you, your good deed to balance the scales?" Bryce's expression darkened. "You're not an obligation. Then what am I?" He turned away, focusing on the distant horizon. "A reminder." "Of what?" "Of what happens when good people do nothing." His voice was so low she barely heard him. "When I finally tracked Catherine down, I learned she died the previous winter. The man who bought her contract had worked her until she caught pneumonia, then tossed her out when she became too sick to be useful. She died alone in an alley behind a saloon." His knuckles whitened on the reins. "I was too late." Olivia's heart ached for the pain evident in every line of his body. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. "You weren't too late for me." His eyes, when they met hers, contained a storm of emotion, grief, guilt, and something else, something warmer that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might pull away, but instead his fingers shifted to clasp hers briefly before releasing them. "No," he agreed softly. "I wasn't too late for you." The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant, before he straightened in his saddle and gestured toward a stream in the distance. "That's the western boundary of the property. Want to see it?" She recognized the deflection, but accepted it. "Lead on, Mr. Nathans." "Bryce," he corrected with the hint of a real smile. "If we're to be friends." They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the boundaries of the Nathans ranch, which proved to be even more extensive than Olivia had imagined. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was setting, painting the hills in gold and amber light. As Bryce helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary, Olivia realized with a jolt of surprise that she hadn't thought about Knight's Ferry or her father once during the entire afternoon. For a few precious hours, she had simply been a woman enjoying the company of an intriguing man in a beautiful place. The realization both comforted and unsettled her. She had known Bryce Nathans less than a week. It was too soon to feel this growing connection, this pull toward him that went beyond gratitude for her rescue. And yet, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her when he looked at her, or the way her thoughts increasingly turned to him during quiet moments. "Thank you for today," she said as they walked toward the house. "I enjoyed seeing your land." "Our land is meant to be seen," he replied, then seemed to catch himself. "The ranch, I mean, it's at its best in this light." Olivia smiled at his discomfort. "Yes, it is." As they reached the porch, Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door. "There you are. I was beginning to wonder." "Supper's nearly ready, and you've both worked up appetites, I'll wager." "We'll be right in," Bryce assured her. When the housekeeper disappeared back inside, he turned to Olivia. "Would you join me for supper in the main house tonight? You've been taking most of your meals alone in the cabin." The invitation pleased her more than it should have. "I'd like that." Supper that evening proved to be a livelier affair than Olivia had expected. Daniel and the other ranch hands joined them around the large oak table, and the conversation flowed easily from cattle prices to local gossip to good-natured ribbing among the men. Bryce sat at the head of the table, speaking less than the others, but occasionally offering a dry comment that sent ripples of laughter around the room. Olivia, seated to his right, observed this different side of him with interest. Among his men, some of his reserve fell away, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the stern exterior. She caught him watching her several times during the meal, his expression unreadable, after the dishes were cleared and the men had retreated to the porch to smoke, Mrs. Abernathy insisted on handling the washing up alone. "You two go on and enjoy the evening," she said with a knowing look that made Olivia blush. They settled in rocking chairs on the front porch, the night air cool against their skin. Crickets chirped in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mates. "Your men respect you," Olivia observed, picking up their earlier conversation. Bryce leaned back in his chair, stretching long legs before him. "They work hard. I pay fair wages and treat them well." "It's a simple equation." "Nothing is ever that simple," she countered. "They care about you, not just the wages." He was quiet for a moment. "They're good men, better than most I've known." "How did you find them?" Daniel was first. "He was 16, sleeping in my barn when I caught him. Turned out he'd run away from an uncle who used his fists more often than not." Bryce's voice held a note of remembered anger. "Offered him a job instead of a thrashing. The others came along later, drifters mostly, looking for honest work." "You gave them a home," Olivia said softly. Bryce's profile was strong in the moonlight. "A job, the home they made themselves, like you did." He turned to look at her then. "You ask a lot of questions, Olivia Turner." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm trying to understand the man who saved me." "I'm not a hero." "No," she agreed. "You're something more complicated than that." A half smile lifted one corner of his mouth. "And you're more perceptive than most. My mother always said I could see into people's hearts." It worried her. "Why?" Olivia's hand stilled on the arms of her rocking chair. "She said it would bring me trouble, that men don't like women who see too much." Bryce considered this. "Your mother was a wise woman, but not entirely correct." "Oh, some men value honesty above comfort. I'd rather face a hard truth than a pleasant lie." Their eyes held in the darkness, and Olivia felt something shift between them, a mutual recognition that went beyond words. The moment was broken by Daniel's laugh as he and the other hands rounded the corner of the house, having finished their cigarettes. "Well, Miss Turner," Bryce said, rising to his feet, "I believe I'll walk you back to your cabin." The short walk across the yard was silent, but not uncomfortably so. When they reached her door, Olivia turned to face him. "Thank you again for today, and for supper." "You're welcome at my table any time," he said, his voice low and warm in the darkness. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all evening. "Why did you invite me to see the ranch today?" "The real reason." Bryce didn't immediately answer. When he did, his honesty surprised her. "Because I wanted to. Because when I see you hanging laundry or helping Mrs. Abernathy, you look, right, like you belong here." He ran a hand through his hair in that now familiar gesture. "That's not something I expected to feel." The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch could have been. Olivia's heart quickened. "I didn't expect it either." For a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he took a deliberate step backward. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Bryce." She watched him walk away, a tall silhouette against the starlit sky, and wondered at the complex emotions he stirred within her. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. As autumn deepened across the ranch, so too did the connection between Olivia and Bryce. Their initial wariness gave way to a comfortable routine that included daily interactions and frequent conversations. Olivia found herself looking forward to the moments when their paths would cross in the kitchen as he came in for coffee, in the yard as she gathered eggs from the henhouse, on the porch in the evenings when the work was done. October brought cooler weather and the cattle roundup. For a week, the ranch bustled with additional hands hired to help gather the herd for market. Olivia and Mrs. Abernathy worked from dawn till dusk to feed the hungry men, and Olivia fell into bed, each night exhausted but satisfied with her contribution. On the final day of the roundup, Olivia rode out with Mrs. Abernathy to deliver lunch to the men in the field. She found herself searching for Bryce among the dusty cowboys, spotting him finally atop Biscuit, directing the operation with calm authority. When he saw her, he rode over, dismounting with a grace that still caught her attention. "This is a welcome sight," he said, accepting the canteen she offered. His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary, and Olivia felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Mrs. Abernathy insisted the men needed proper feeding," she explained, gesturing to the wagon where the housekeeper was already distributing sandwiches to the grateful cowhands. "And you volunteered to help. It wasn't a question." "I enjoy being useful," she said simply. Bryce wiped dust from his face with a bandana. "You're more than useful, Olivia. The place runs smoother since you arrived. Mrs. Abernathy says she hasn't had the kitchen so well organized in years." The compliment pleased her. "I've had a good teacher in Mrs. Abernathy." He glanced toward the wagon, then back to her. "Would you ride with me a moment? There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Olivia agreed, allowing him to help her onto Daisy, who had been tethered to the wagon. They rode away from the roundup, following a ridge that overlooked the valley where the main herd was being gathered. "The cattle look healthy," she observed, admiring the sea of red-brown backs moving like a living river below them. "Best year we've had," Bryce confirmed. "The rain came at the right time and we haven't lost many to predators." He pointed to the eastern horizon. "That's what I wanted to show you." Olivia followed his gesture and saw a cluster of buildings in the distance, too far to make out clearly. "Another ranch. No, that's Oakdale. Nearest town of any size. I'll be taking the men there tomorrow after the buyers take the herd. Thought you might like to come along." She looked at him in surprise. "To town? You've been here over a month without setting foot off the ranch. Thought you might appreciate some new surroundings." He paused. "There's a dressmaker there. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you might need some things for winter." Olivia smoothed her hands over her borrowed dress, which had been taken in and altered to fit her smaller frame. "That's very thoughtful." "It's practical," he countered, though his eyes were soft. "Can't have you freezing when the snow comes." "Does it snow much here?" "Not like back east, but we get our share in the mountains. Enough to make things interesting come December." The casual reference to spending winter at the ranch caught her attention. Neither of them had spoken of how long she might stay. The agreement had been temporary, but as the weeks passed, Olivia had found herself thinking less and less about leaving and more about putting down roots in this peaceful place. "I'd like to see Oakdale," she said finally. "Thank you for the invitation." Bryce nodded, looking pleased. "We should get back before Mrs. Abernathy sends out a search party." As they rode back toward the wagon, Olivia gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Bryce, may I ask you something personal?" He glanced at her, wariness creeping back into his expression. "You can ask." "Have you ever thought about selling the ranch, going back east?" The question clearly surprised him. "No, why would you ask that?" Olivia shrugged. "You built this place from nothing. It's successful now. You could sell it for a good price, start over somewhere else if you wanted." Bryce was quiet for a long moment. "This is home now," he said finally. "I don't need another." The simple declaration touched her deeply. "I understand that feeling." He looked at her sharply. "Do you?" She nodded, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "I do, more each day." Something flared in his eyes, then hope, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she wasn't ready to name. But before he could respond, Daniel galloped up to them, waving urgently. "Boss, we've got trouble with the lead steer. Broke away and is heading for the ravine." Bryce immediately switched from the man who had been showing her the horizon to the rancher in command. I'll be right there. He turned to Olivia. Get back to Mrs. Abernathy. I might be late for supper. With that, he spurred Biscuit forward, following Daniel at a gallop toward the commotion below. Olivia watched him go, admiring the confident way he handled his mount, and the immediate response his arrival generated among the men. In just over a month, she had come to see many facets of Bryce Nathans, the stern businessman, the fair employer, the haunted brother, and, increasingly, the gentle man who looked at her as if she mattered, as if she belonged. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. To belong somewhere to someone after having been so callously discarded by her own father was a dream she scarcely dared to nurture. That evening, as she helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare a late supper for the men who would return exhausted from the day's work, Olivia shared their conversation about visiting Oakdale. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," Mrs. Abernathy exclaimed, beaming as she stirred a pot of stew. "It's about time he took you somewhere. You can't spend all your days cooped up here." "I don't feel cooped up," Olivia protested. "I enjoy being here." Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look. "Of course you do, but a young woman needs more than work and solitude. You need pretty things, companionship." "I have companionship," Olivia said, thinking of her evenings on the porch with Bryce, their conversations growing deeper and more personal as the weeks passed. "Yes, well." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "That's another matter entirely, isn't it?" Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Mrs. Abernathy put down her spoon and faced Olivia directly. "I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, and how you look at him." "Mrs. Abernathy." "Oh, don't Mrs. Abernathy me," the housekeeper chuckled. "I've known Bryce Nathans for 5 years, and I've never seen him so alive as he's been since you arrived. He smiles now, did you know that? Actually smiles." Olivia busied herself cutting bread, hoping to hide her flaming cheeks. "He saved me from a terrible situation." "Of course I'm grateful to him." "Gratitude isn't what makes your eyes light up when he enters a room," Mrs. Abernathy observed shrewdly. "Nor is it what makes him linger by the window watching you hang laundry." "He does that?" Olivia couldn't help asking, then immediately regretted the slip. Mrs. Abernathy's triumphant expression said it all. "Regularly. Now stop pretending you don't care for the man and help me get this stew on the table. They'll be starving when they get in." Later that night, after the men had eaten their fill and retreated to the bunkhouse, Olivia found herself alone with Bryce on the porch. The October air held a distinct chill, and she wrapped a shawl Mrs. Abernathy had loaned her around her shoulders. "Successful day?" she asked, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes. He nodded, stretching his long legs before him. "Got the lead steer back before he hurt himself or anyone else. Buyers will take the whole herd tomorrow, good price, too." "That's wonderful." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you still go to Oakdale tomorrow?" "If you still want to go, I do." He studied her in the dim light from the window. "I meant to ask, do you have funds of your own? For purchases in town?" The question stung her pride, though she knew it was practical. "No. Everything was sold to pay my father's debts." Bryce nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "I'll advance you against future wages. You've more than earned it." "That's very generous," she said stiffly. He must have heard the pride in her voice because his expression softened. "It's not charity, Olivia. It's what you're due." She relaxed slightly. "Thank you. I would like to have something of my own again." "You should have more than something," he said quietly. "You should have whatever you want." The intensity in his voice caught her off guard. "That's a dangerous offer to make to a woman." A smile tugged at his lips. "You don't strike me as someone with extravagant tastes." "How would you know?" she challenged, warming to the playful tone that had developed between them in recent weeks. Because I've watched you, he said simply. You value useful things, beautiful things, but not expensive things for their own sake. You'd rather have one well-made dress than 3 flimsy ones. His perception surprised her. You've been paying attention. To you? Yes. The admission hung in the night air between them, more revealing than he perhaps intended. Olivia's heart quickened. Why? Bryce didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low and careful. Because you're unexpected. When I brought you here, I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you sanctuary until you could move on. I didn't expect you to fit so well here, to become. What? She prompted when he fell silent. He met her gaze directly. Essential. The word resonated through her like a bell. Bryce, before she could continue, he stood abruptly. It's late. We should both get some rest if we're riding to Oakdale tomorrow. The sudden shift left her momentarily speechless. Of course, she managed finally, rising to her feet. He walked her to her cabin as had become their routine, but tonight there was a tension between them that hadn't been there before. At her door, he paused. Olivia, I shouldn't have said, don't, she interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Don't take it back. In the moonlight, his expression was a study in conflict. I don't want to pressure you. Your situation, my situation, is of my own choosing, she said firmly. I could have gone to Sonora that first day. I could have left any time since. I stayed because I wanted to. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. And now? What do you want now? The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Olivia felt as if she stood at the edge of a precipice, knowing that her answer would change everything between them. I want, she began, but was interrupted by a shout from the direction of the main house. Boss, you're needed. Bryce's head jerked up, instantly alert. What is it, Daniel? The young man ran toward them, panting. Telegram from town, just delivered by a rider from Oakdale. It's marked urgent. Bryce took the yellow paper, moving toward the light spilling from Olivia's cabin window to read it. She watched his expression harden as he scanned the message. What is it? She asked, concerned by the grim set of his mouth. Trouble, he said shortly, folding the telegram and tucking it into his pocket. I need to ride to Oakdale tonight, but it's already past 9 and you've been working since dawn. This won't wait till morning. He turned to Daniel. Saddle Biscuit again, would you? And tell Lewis I need him to come with me. As Daniel hurried off to follow orders, Bryce turned back to Olivia. I'm sorry about tomorrow. We'll have to postpone the trip to town. Never mind that, she said dismissively. What's happened? He hesitated, then apparently decided she deserved the truth. Jasper Quinn is in Oakdale. Olivia felt as if ice water had been poured down her spine. The man from the auction, the saloon owner, Bryce nodded grimly. He's been asking questions about you, about me. But why? The contract was burned. He has no claim on me. Men like Quinn don't care about legal claims. He bid on you once. In his mind, that gives him some kind of right. Bryce's voice hardened. I need to make it very clear that it doesn't. Fear and something else, pride in his protective instinct, warred within her. Let me come with you. Absolutely not, he said sharply. You're safer here. But Olivia. He took her hands in his touch firm but gentle. Trust me on this. I won't let him anywhere near you. But I need to know you're safe while I deal with him. The intensity in his gray eyes silenced her protest. Promise me you'll be careful, she said instead. His expression softened. I promise. He hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. We'll finish our conversation when I return. The unexpected gesture left her speechless. She could only nod as he strode away toward the barn where Daniel would have Biscuit waiting. Olivia barely slept that night, torn between worry for Bryce and fear of what Jasper Quinn's appearance might mean for her future at the ranch. By morning, she was exhausted but too anxious to rest. Mrs. Abernathy found her in the kitchen at dawn, already preparing breakfast for the remaining ranch hands. "You heard?" the housekeeper asked, her normally cheerful face creased with concern. Olivia nodded. "Quinn is in Oakdale. Bryce rode out last night to confront him." "That man is trouble, Mrs. Abernathy said darkly. "Always was, even before your situation. You know him, of him. His reputation reaches even here." She patted Olivia's hand. "Don't you worry, dear. Mr. Nathans won't let anything happen to you." "It's not me I'm worried about," Olivia admitted. "Quinn is a violent man. What if Bryce gets hurt because of me?" Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "That's not because of you. That's because Mr. Nathans cares about you and would do anything to keep you safe. There's a difference." Olivia turned away, blinking back sudden tears. "I never asked for that. Love isn't something we ask for, dear. It simply is." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Was that what she felt for Bryce Nathans? What he might feel for her? The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. "He'll be back today, Mrs. Abernathy said with confidence. "And when he is, perhaps you two can finally stop dancing around each other and admit what everyone else can plainly see." The day dragged interminably. Olivia threw herself into work, helping with the laundry, assisting the cook who had been hired to feed the extra hands during roundup, and even mucking out the chicken coop to keep her hands and mind occupied. Every hoofbeat made her heart race, hoping it was Bryce returning, but each time she was disappointed. As dusk fell with no sign of him or Lewis, her anxiety grew. What if something had gone wrong? What if Quinn had brought men with him? What if the sound of horses approaching at a gallop interrupted her spiraling thoughts? She rushed to the porch, straining to see through the gathering darkness. 2 riders appeared, and even at a distance, she recognized Bryce's tall figure on Biscuit. Relief flooded through her, so powerful she had to grip the porch railing to steady herself. As they drew closer, she could see that both men were dusty and tired, but appeared uninjured. Bryce swung down from his saddle with less than his usual grace, betraying his exhaustion. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the dusk. As promised, Lewis led both horses toward the barn, leaving them alone. Bryce climbed the porch steps slowly, as if every muscle ached. "You're exhausted," Olivia said, concern replacing relief. "Come inside. You need food and rest." He didn't argue, following her into the house where Mrs. Abernathy was already setting out a late supper. The housekeeper took one look at Bryce and nodded decisively. "Sit before you fall down, Mr. Nathans. I'll fetch you some whiskey with your supper." Bryce sank into a chair at the kitchen table, removing his hat and running a hand through dust-matted hair. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy." Olivia poured him a cup of coffee while they waited for the whiskey, studying him for signs of injury. "What happened? Did you find Quinn?" "I found him." Bryce's voice was flat. "He won't be bothering you again." A cold shiver ran down her spine. "What does that mean? What did you do?" He looked up, seeming to register her fear. "Nothing permanent. Just made it clear that coming after you would cost him more than he's willing to pay." Mrs. Abernathy returned with a glass of amber liquid, which Bryce downed in one swallow. "The man's a coward at heart," he continued after the whiskey had burned its way down. "He likes easy prey. Once he understood you're under my protection, he backed down quickly enough." Olivia released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You didn't have to fight him." A ghost of a smile touched Bryce's lips. "Would it worry you if I had?" "Of course it would," she said without thinking. "I couldn't bear it if you were hurt because of me. Something softened in his expression. Like I said, Quinn's a coward. Once Lewis and I made it clear he was outnumbered, he lost interest in pressing his imaginary claim. Mrs. Abernathy bustled about, setting a plate of hot food before Bryce. "Eat now, talk later. You look dead on your feet." Bryce obeyed, too tired to argue. Olivia sat across from him, watching as he methodically worked his way through the hearty stew and bread. When he finally pushed his empty plate away, some color had returned to his face. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. That was exactly what I needed." The housekeeper beamed. "You're welcome. Now I'm off to my bed. You two don't stay up too late." With a meaningful glance between them that made Olivia blush, she retreated to her quarters at the back of the house. Alone now, Olivia found herself suddenly shy. "You should rest too. You've been riding for nearly 24 hours. Bryce nodded but made no move to leave the table. "We were interrupted last night." Her heart skipped. "Yes, you were about to tell me what you want." The directness of his reminder caught her off guard. It's late, you're tired." "Olivia." Just her name, but it held a wealth of meaning, patience, longing, a question. She met his gaze and found him watching her with an intensity that took her breath away. "What I want," she said softly, "is to stay here with you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Bryce's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes, a warming, a lightening, told her he understood what she wasn't quite ready to say directly. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Your freedom is mine to give where I choose," she finished firmly. "I'm not asking for promises, Bryce. I'm just telling you that I don't want to leave, not yet, maybe not ever." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I don't want you to leave either." The admission, simple as it was, felt monumental. Olivia turned her hand beneath his so their palms met, fingers interlacing. "Then I'll stay," she whispered. "As long as you want me to." His grip tightened. That could be a very long time. The promise in his words made her smile. "Good." For a long moment, they simply sat there, connected by their joined hands and the understanding that had grown between them over the weeks. Finally, Bryce sighed and released her reluctantly. "I should let you rest," he said. Tomorrow we'll talk more." Olivia nodded, both disappointed and relieved at the respite. What she felt for Bryce was powerful and growing stronger by the day, but it was also new and fragile. Time would strengthen it, she was certain. "Good night, Bryce," she said, rising from the table. He stood as well, suddenly looking uncertain. "May I walk you to your cabin?" The formality of the request, after everything, made her smile. "I'd like that." Outside, the October night was crisp and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the black velvet sky. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached her door. "Quinn is really gone?" she asked, needing the reassurance one more time. Bryce nodded. "He's gone. But even if he wasn't, you're safe here, Olivia. I promise you that. I know." And she did. Whatever else might be uncertain in her life, she trusted Bryce Nathan's completely, a realization that might have frightened her once, but now brought only peace. He hesitated, then bent and pressed his lips to her cheek, a touch so gentle it might have been the brush of a butterfly's wing. "Sleep well," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "You too," she managed, her heart racing at his proximity. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face and made him look younger, unburdened. "I will. For the first time in a long while, I think I will." As Olivia watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness, she touched her fingers to the spot where his lips had been. Not quite a lover's kiss, but a promise of one. A beginning. She entered her cabin, suddenly exhausted but happier than she could remember being since before her mother's illness. Whatever the future held, she wouldn't face it alone. That certainty carried her into dreams filled with gray eyes and gentle hands. November brought change to the ranch. With the roundup complete and the extra hands paid and gone, a quieter rhythm established itself. Mornings were crisp, afternoons golden, and evenings increasingly spent around the fireplace in the main house rather than on the porch as temperatures dropped. The promised trip to Oakdale finally took place in mid-November. Bryce, true to his word, advanced Olivia enough money to purchase winter clothes and a few modest luxuries. The dressmaker, a friendly woman named Mrs. Peterson, clucked sympathetically over Olivia's borrowed garments and promised to have 3 new dresses ready within the week. "Your wife has lovely coloring, Mr. Nathans," she commented as she held a bolt of deep blue wool against Olivia's skin. "This will complement her eyes beautifully." Neither of them corrected the assumption, though Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks. Bryce merely nodded, his expression unreadable as he paid the deposit for the dresses. That evening, as they rode back to the ranch side by side, Olivia broached the subject that had been on her mind since the dressmaker's comment. "People in town think I'm your wife," she said carefully, watching for his reaction. Bryce kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Does that bother you?" "No," she admitted, "but it isn't true." He glanced at her then. "Would you prefer I correct them?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know, it seems dishonest not to. Perhaps." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't contradict Mrs. Peterson because her assumption protects you. A single woman living on a ranch with a single man invites gossip. Being thought of as my wife shields you from that." Olivia considered this. It was true that the people of Oakdale had been uniformly welcoming, treating her with a respect she hadn't expected. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "We can tell them the truth if you prefer," Bryce offered. "That you're employed as a housekeeper." Something about the suggestion sat wrong with her. "But that isn't the whole truth either, is it?" His eyes, when they met hers, held a question. "What is the truth, Olivia?" She looked away, not ready to articulate the feelings that had been growing steadily within her. "I don't know yet," she admitted softly, "but I think we're finding out." That seemed to satisfy him. "Then let's let Oakdale think what it wants for now. The truth will become clear in time." As they approached the ranch, the main house glowing warmly in the twilight, Olivia was struck by how much it felt like coming home. Not just shelter, not just safety, but home, a place where she belonged. That sense of belonging deepened as November gave way to December. The first snow fell, dusting the hills with white that glittered in the morning sunlight. Olivia, in her new winter cloak, stood on the porch watching it with childlike wonder. "It's beautiful," she said when Bryce joined her, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. "First snow always is." He handed her one of the cups, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Wait until February when we're knee-deep in slush," she laughed. "Even then, I think I'll find it beautiful." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "You find beauty in unexpected places. Is that so surprising?" "No," he said thoughtfully. "Just rare." Their relationship had evolved in the weeks since their conversation in the kitchen. Nothing had been formally declared between them, but something had shifted nonetheless. Bryce sought out her company more deliberately, joining her for walks around the property, asking her opinion on ranch matters, bringing her small gifts from his trips to neighboring farms, a jar of honey, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers that still bloomed in sheltered places. For her part, Olivia found herself looking for ways to please him, learning to cook his favorite meals, making sure the house was warm when he returned from long days outdoors, leaving notes for him by the coffee pot when he rose before her. Small gestures that spoke of deeper feelings neither was quite ready to name. Christmas approached, bringing with it a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Abernathy was determined that the holiday would be properly celebrated, despite Bryce's initial protests that it was just another day. "It most certainly is not just another day," the housekeeper declared, hands on her ample hips. "It's Christmas, and we'll have a proper feast and decorations and gifts, same as civilized folk." Bryce looked to Olivia for support but found none. "I agree with Mrs. Abernathy," she said, hiding a smile at his betrayed expression. "Christmas should be celebrated, especially this year." "What's special about this year?" he asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Olivia met his gaze steadily. "Everything." His expression softened, and he conceded defeat with good grace. "Very well, ladies, Christmas it is, but nothing extravagant." Mrs. Abernathy's idea of nothing extravagant proved to be quite different from Bryce's. Soon the main house was festooned with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles in every window. The rich sense of baking filled the air as she and Olivia prepared traditional treats: gingerbread, mincemeat pies, and plum pudding. A week before Christmas, Daniel and Louis rode out and returned with a magnificent pine tree, which they installed in the corner of the main room. Decorating it became an evening's entertainment, with even the usually reserved Bryce joining in, lifting Olivia to place the star atop the highest branch. His hands lingered at her waist as he set her down, their faces close, breaths mingling in the cold air. For a moment, Olivia thought he might kiss her there in front of everyone. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Well done," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It looks perfect." The moment passed, but the warmth in his eyes stayed with her long into the night. Christmas Eve arrived with another light snowfall. The ranch hands, invited to celebrate in the main house, arrived in their Sunday best, bearing homemade gifts and high spirits. Mrs. Abernathy outdid herself with the feast: roast goose, venison, potatoes roasted with rosemary, fresh bread, and more desserts than the table could comfortably hold. Olivia, wearing her new green dress with holly berries pinned at the collar, felt a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. Looking around the table at these people who had become her family in just a few short months, she could scarcely believe how much her life had changed since that terrible day in Knight's Ferry. After supper, they gathered around the fireplace to exchange gifts. Olivia had spent weeks secretly working on presents for everyone: a new scarf for Mrs. Abernathy, carved wooden figurines for the men that she had commissioned from a craftsman in Oakdale. For Bryce, she had embroidered handkerchiefs with his initials, a skill her mother had taught her long ago. "These are beautiful," he said when he opened her gift, running his thumb over the precise stitching. "Thank you." His own gift to her came in a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a silver pendant in the shape of a star, hanging from a delicate chain. "Bryce," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "It's exquisite." "It reminded me of you," he said quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. Bright and constant, tears pricked at her eyes as she handed him the necklace. "Would you?" He took it, waiting as she turned and lifted her hair. His fingers were warm against the back of her neck as he fastened the clasp, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. When she turned back to face him, his expression held a tenderness that made her heart skip. The evening continued with singing, storytelling, and more food than anyone could possibly eat. By the time the ranch hands departed for their quarters, full of food and Christmas cheer, it was well past midnight. Mrs. Abernathy, yawning broadly, bid them good night, leaving Bryce and Olivia alone by the dying fire. "Shall I walk you to your cabin?" he asked, as had become their custom. Olivia nodded, suddenly shy despite the intimacy that had grown between them. Outside, the world was transformed by moonlight on fresh snow, every familiar shape made magical by its silvery coating. They walked in companionable silence until they reached her door. There, Bryce hesitated. "I have another gift for you," he said. One I didn't want to give in front of the others. Curious, Olivia watched as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he tipped something into his palm, a key. "What's this?" she asked. "The key to the main house," he said simply. "I want you to have it." She looked from the key to his face, uncertain of his meaning. "I don't understand." Bryce took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I'm asking you to move into the main house. With me." The implication of his words hung in the frosty air between them. Olivia's heart raced. "As your housekeeper." "No," his voice was firm. "As my wife." She stared at him, scarcely believing what she'd heard. "Your wife," he smiled then, a tender, vulnerable smile that transformed his usually stern face. "I love you, Olivia Turner. I think I have since the moment you stood on that auction block with your chin raised, refusing to be broken." He took her gloved hand in his. "You came here as a stranger seeking sanctuary. You've become the heart of this place, of my home. Of me." Tears filled her eyes, spilling over to freeze on her cheeks. "Bryce, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden. I know we've never even—" She cut him off by raising up on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief but unmistakable in its meaning. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "My answer is yes." For a heartbeat, he seemed frozen in disbelief. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against his chest as his mouth found hers again. This kiss was different, deeper, hungrier, full of promise and longing finally given voice. When they broke apart, both breathless, his forehead rested against hers. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated because of what I did in Knight's Ferry." Olivia framed his face with her hands, making him look at her. "I'm not marrying you out of gratitude, Bryce Nathans. I'm marrying you because I love you. Because you make me feel safe and valued and cherished. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You'll never regret this." "I know," she said simply, believing it with her whole heart. They stood there in the moonlight, snow falling gently around them, wrapped in each other's arms and the promise of a future neither had dared to hope for just months before. "When?" Bryce asked finally. "When will you marry me?" Olivia smiled up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if the preacher can come," he laughed, the sound rich and free in a way she'd never heard from him before. "Tomorrow it is. Christmas Day. I can't think of a better gift." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands tangled in her hair as if he couldn't get enough of touching her. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "You should go inside," he said reluctantly. "Before I forget, I'm trying to be a gentleman until tomorrow." Olivia smiled, feeling bold and cherished and wonderfully alive. "Tomorrow," she agreed, "and then every day after that." "Every day," he echoed, pressing one last kiss to her forehead before stepping back. "Sleep well, my love." "I will now," she said, touching the star pendant at her throat, a symbol of the bright, constant future that awaited them both. The next day, Christmas Day, dawned clear and cold, the world sparkling under a fresh blanket of snow. By noon, word had spread throughout the ranch that the boss was getting married, and Mrs. Abernathy had thrown herself into preparing a wedding feast on top of the Christmas dinner already planned. Daniel had ridden out at first light to fetch the preacher from Oakdale, who arrived just after midday, red-cheeked from the cold but beaming at the prospect of a Christmas wedding. Olivia wore her new blue dress, which Mrs. Abernathy had quickly adorned with white ribbons and lace from her own sewing box. The housekeeper had also fashioned a bouquet of evergreen sprigs and the last dried roses from the garden, tied with a white satin ribbon. "Something borrowed," she declared, pressing a delicate lace handkerchief into Olivia's hand. "This was my mother's." Tears threatened again as Olivia hugged the older woman who had become like family to her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "None of that now, Mrs." Abernathy said briskly, though her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "Can't have you all red-eyed when you meet your groom." The ceremony took place in the main room of the house, before the Christmas tree that now seemed to Olivia like an omen of the joy to come. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, Daniel serving as best man, pride evident in his young face. And then Bryce was there, waiting for her by the fireplace, his expression one of wonder and love as she walked toward him. He wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back, and the warmth in his gray eyes made her feel as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever beheld. The preacher's words were traditional and heartfelt, but Olivia scarcely heard them. All she could focus on was Bryce's hand holding hers, the steady strength of his presence beside her, and the future stretching before them bright with promise and possibility. "I, Bryce, take thee, Olivia, to be my wedded wife," he repeated after the preacher, his voice strong and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it came her turn, Olivia's voice trembled slightly, but her conviction was absolute. "I, Olivia, take thee, Bryce, to be my wedded husband." The simple gold band he placed on her finger had belonged to his mother. He told her later the only family heirloom he had managed to save before heading west in search of his sister. The symbolism of it, this piece of his past becoming part of their future, brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Bryce's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a beginning rather than an end. Cheers erupted around them as the ranch hands and Mrs. Abernathy celebrated the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. The wedding feast that followed was joyous and abundant, with toasts and laughter and more happiness than Olivia had thought possible in a single day. As evening fell, the guests gradually dispersed, leaving the newlyweds alone in the house that was now truly their home. "Are you happy, Mrs. Nathans?" Bryce asked as they stood before the fire, his arms wrapped around her from behind. Olivia leaned back against his chest, savoring the rightness of being there. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I want you to know something. What happened in Knight's Ferry, your father, the auction, none of that defines who you are to me. You're not someone I saved. You're the woman I love, my partner, my equal in every way." Tears blurred her vision as she looked up at him. "I know," she whispered, "just as you're not defined by your past either. We're building something new together, something that belongs only to us." His smile was tender as he brushed away a tear with his thumb. "Yes, we are." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else. I want to give you a wedding gift." "You've already given me everything," she protested. Bryce shook his head. "Not quite everything." He walked to his desk and removed a document from a drawer, returning to place it in her hands. "This is for you." Olivia unfolded the paper, scanning its legal language with growing confusion. "I don't understand. This is a deed to the ranch," he confirmed. "I've had it changed to include your name alongside mine. Equal partners, as I said." Stunned, she looked from the document to his face. "Bryce, this is too much. The ranch is yours. You built it from nothing." "And now I'm sharing it with my wife," he said simply. "This is our home, Olivia. Our future." I want it to be yours in every way that matters." Overwhelmed by the depth of trust this represented, Olivia could only embrace him, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll never take this gift for granted." "I know you won't." He tilted her face up to his. "Just as I'll never take for granted the gift you've given me, a second chance at family, at happiness." Their kiss deepened, and this time there was no reason to stop, no propriety to maintain. They were husband and wife, partners in life and in love. Later, much later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts of what was now their shared bed, Olivia traced the scar along Bryce's jawline with gentle fingers. "How did you get this?" she asked softly. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Bar fight. Back when I was searching for Catherine, a man said something unkind about women who were sold into contracts. I took exception." The casual reference to his past no longer pained him as it once had, she noticed. Perhaps love was healing those old wounds just as it had healed hers. "You've always been a protector," she observed, "even before me." "Not always successfully," he said, a shadow crossing his face. "I failed Catherine." "No," Olivia said firmly. "You tried to save her. The fact that you were too late doesn't diminish what you attempted. And it led you here, to this place, to the man you've become." She pressed her lips to the scar. "To me." He gathered her closer, his breath warm against her hair. "To you," he agreed, "the best part of my life." As snow fell softly outside their window, and the fire burned low in the grate, Olivia Turner Nathans drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, no longer owned, but freely given, no longer lost, but found, no longer alone, but beloved. Spring came early to the foothills that year, as if nature itself celebrated their union. By March, wildflowers carpeted the meadows and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures. The ranch thrived under their joint care, Bryce handling the cattle and finances, while Olivia managed the household and garden with Mrs. Abernathy's continued help. Word had spread throughout the county about Bryce Nathans's Christmas bride, and visitors frequently rode out to the ranch, neighbors curious about the woman who had captured the heart of the once solitary rancher. Olivia welcomed them with genuine warmth, establishing herself as a gracious hostess and earning the respect of even the most skeptical old-timers. "You've brought this place to life," Bryce told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It was just a ranch before. Now it's a home." Olivia smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "We did that together." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You make me a better man, Olivia Nathans." "You were already a good man," she countered. "You just needed someone to remind you of it." Their happiness deepened as spring turned to summer. The ranch prospered, and their love grew stronger with each passing day. Though they rarely spoke of Knight's Ferry or the circumstances that had brought them together, the shadow of that day gradually receded, replaced by the bright reality of their shared life. In July, Olivia received unexpected news that momentarily reopened old wounds. A letter arrived from Knight's Ferry, addressed to her in an unfamiliar hand. It proved to be from the town's doctor, informing her that Jacob Turner, her father, had died following a prolonged illness. "There's no estate to speak of," the doctor wrote, "but he asked me to tell you that he was sorry in the end. If you wish to claim his personal effects, they are being held at my office." Olivia sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands, unsure how to feel. Her father had sold her like property, yet in his final moments he had thought of her, had expressed regret. Bryce found her there, tears streaming silently down her face. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as the complex emotions worked their way through her. "I don't know why I'm crying," she admitted against his chest. He betrayed me in the worst possible way. He was still your father, Bryce said quietly. It's not wrong to mourn what should have been, even while acknowledging what was. She looked up at him, grateful once again for his understanding. Would you? Would you go with me? Tonight's ferry, I think I need to see it once more to truly put it behind me. Concern flashed across his face. Are you sure? There's nothing for you there but bad memories. Not entirely, she said softly. If not for what happened there, I would never have found you. His expression softened. If you want to go, of course I'll take you. They made the journey 2 weeks later, traveling by wagon rather than horseback for comfort. As they approached the town, Olivia felt a curious detachment, as if the dusty streets and weathered buildings belonged to someone else's past, rather than her own. The doctor received them cordially, expressing condolences and presenting Olivia with a small wooden box containing her father's few possessions, a pocket watch, a faded photograph of her mother, and a sealed letter addressed to her in her father's shaky hand. She waited until they were alone in their hotel room that evening to open it. Bryce sat beside her on the bed, a steady presence as she broke the seal. My dearest Olivia, her father had written in painfully careful script. Words cannot undo the terrible wrong I did you. In my weakness and desperation, I betrayed the most sacred trust between a father and his child. If you are reading this, I am gone and cannot beg your forgiveness in person. I do not deserve it, but I ask it nonetheless. Your mother would be ashamed of what I became after she left us, but proud of the strong woman you have grown to be. I pray you have found happiness despite my failings. With deepest regret and enduring love, your father. Tears blurred the words as Olivia finished reading. The letter offered no excuses, no justifications, only a simple acknowledgement of wrong and a plea for forgiveness that her father had been too ashamed to make in life. Can I forgive him? She whispered, looking to Bryce for guidance. He took her hand in his. That's for you to decide. But forgiveness isn't about absolving him of responsibility for what he did. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and pain. Olivia considered this, turning the letter over in her hands. I think I already have forgiven him. Not because he deserved it, but because holding on to that anger serves no purpose now. Bryce nodded, pride evident in his eyes. Your capacity for compassion is one of the many reasons I love you. She leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. Thank you for bringing me here, for helping me close this chapter. They remained in Knight's Ferry only long enough to see her father's simple grave and for Olivia to leave wildflowers upon it, not out of sentiment, but as a gesture of farewell to the past. As they drove away the next morning, she didn't look back. Ready to go home? Bryce asked as the town receded behind them. Olivia smiled, her heart light despite the emotional journey. More than ready. The trip back to the ranch seemed shorter somehow, as if the distance between her past and her future had compressed. When they crested the final hill and saw their home spread out below them, Olivia felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it took her breath away. It's beautiful, she said, not for the first time. Bryce squeezed her hand. Yes, it is. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm after their return. Summer ripened into autumn, bringing with it the familiar bustle of roundup and preparation for winter. Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to the business side of the ranch, revealing an aptitude for figures that complemented Bryce's practical knowledge of cattle and land. You should be handling all the accounts, he told her one evening as they reviewed the ledgers together. You've got a better head for numbers than I do, she laughed. I doubt that, but I'm happy to help. We make a good team. The best, he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As September turned to October, Olivia began to suspect that their family might soon be growing. Her suspicions were confirmed by Dr. Wilson in Oakdale, who pronounced her in excellent health and expecting a child in late spring. She waited until their first anniversary Christmas Day to share the news with Bryce. After the festivities with the ranch hands and Mrs. Abernathy, she presented him with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "Another gift?" he asked, surprised. They had already exchanged presents earlier in the day. "The most important one," she said, unable to keep the tremor of excitement from her voice. Bryce unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a pair of tiny knitted booties. He stared at them, uncomprehending for a moment before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Olivia," he whispered, looking up at her with such naked hope that tears sprang to her eyes. She nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "In May, Dr. Wilson says everything looks perfectly healthy." Bryce's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her in his arms with a whoop of joy that brought Mrs. Abernathy running from the kitchen, convinced something was wrong. "Nothing's wrong," Bryce assured her, his face alight with happiness. "Everything's right. We're having a baby." The news spread quickly through the ranch and surrounding community. Friends and neighbors brought gifts and advice, and Bryce embarked on an ambitious expansion of the main house, insisting their child would need a proper nursery. "And siblings, eventually," he added, his eyes twinkling as he pulled her close. "I'm thinking a whole houseful." Olivia laughed, loving the enthusiasm with which he embraced impending fatherhood. "Let's start with one and see how we manage." As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Olivia found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. From the desperate, terrified young woman on the auction block to the confident, beloved wife and mother to be, the transformation seemed almost too miraculous to comprehend. "What are you thinking?" Bryce asked one evening in early May as they sat on the porch, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. She smiled, covering his hand with her own. "I was thinking about beginnings and endings, how the worst day of my life led to the best ones." He nodded, understanding as always. "From that first moment you amazed me, standing there with your head high, refusing to be broken by what was happening to you." "I was terrified," she admitted, "until I saw you. Why me? I was just another bidder to you then." Olivia considered this. "No, you weren't. There was something in your eyes, anger, yes, but also recognition. As if you saw me, the real me, not just another piece of property to be bought." Bryce's arm tightened around her. "I did see you. I saw your courage, your dignity. I knew then that whatever happened, you wouldn't be defeated by it. Because of you," she said softly. "You gave me back my freedom when you burned that contract. You would have found your way without me," he insisted. "But I'm grateful beyond words that you chose to find it with me instead." The baby kicked then, a strong movement that made them both laugh. "Someone agrees with you," Olivia said, guiding Bryce's hand to the spot where their child made its presence known. His expression as he felt the movement was one of wonder. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed. "After Catherine, I thought I'd spend my life alone trying to make amends for failing her." "You didn't fail her," Olivia said firmly, a conversation they'd had many times, "and you're not alone anymore. You'll never be alone again." Their son was born on a perfect May morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Bryce, who had paced outside the bedroom during the hours of labor, despite Olivia's insistence that he could stay, burst into the room at the sound. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the red-faced, squalling infant in Olivia's arms, "and a healthy one at that." Bryce stood frozen in the doorway, his expression a mixture of awe and terror as he beheld his wife and newborn son. Olivia looked up at him, radiant despite her exhaustion. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached the bed as if in a dream, sinking down beside her and staring at the tiny face peering out from the blanket. "He's perfect," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to stroke the baby's cheek. "Would you like to hold him?" The flash of panic in Bryce's eyes would have been comical if it weren't so endearing. "I don't know how." "Like this," Olivia demonstrated, then carefully transferred their son to his father's arms. The transformation on Bryce's face as he cradled his child was something Olivia knew she would remember until her dying day. All the hard lines of his features softened, and the love that shone in his eyes was almost painful to witness in its intensity. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, tiny fingers wrapping around Bryce's thumb with surprising strength. The connection between them was immediate and profound. "What shall we call him?" Olivia asked, though they had discussed names extensively during her pregnancy. Bryce looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "What about Benjamin, after your father?" The suggestion stunned her. "My father? But he gave me you," Bryce said simply. "Whatever his failings, I owe him that much. And it would be a way to honor the good in him, the part that raised you to be the woman you are." Touched beyond words, Olivia nodded. "Benjamin it is, Benjamin William Nathans." The middle name was for Bryce's father, another gesture of reconciliation with the past, as the midwife and Mrs. Abernathy busied themselves around the room. Bryce leaned down to press a kiss to Olivia's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, "for my son, for our family, for everything." She reached up to touch his cheek, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Thank you for saving me that day. For giving me a future when I thought mine was over." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "And we'll keep doing so every day for the rest of our lives." As if in agreement, baby Benjamin cooed, his tiny face turning instinctively toward his father's voice. The three of them formed a perfect circle of love, and belonging, a family forged from adversity but strengthened by choice, by courage, and by the kind of love that transforms even the darkest moments into stepping stones toward light. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the ranch in golden light, promising growth and renewal. Inside, Olivia Turner Nathans looked at her husband and son and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, free, loved, and home at last.